Hi, everybody. Welcome to Textual Criticism of the Old and New Testaments, Intentional Changes, Part 2. So, we looked at intentional changes, the first half of them yesterday. Let's get into the rest of them now. So there are euphemisms that appear in the text where words are changed to sort of soften the meaning, make it easier to read in a psychological sense, perhaps. Theological changes that took place, and intentional additions or glosses that were added to the text. So euphemisms. This is replacing a term or a phrase that is considered offensive or inappropriate. So in the exercise that I did with my class, there was a phrase that I put in there that said, "What the hell is up with this weather?" Some of them had a euphemistic change, and they said, "What's up with this weather?" Taking out and replacing that phrase, changing it to make it less or more appropriate, less offensive. This happens a lot in the Old Testament text with the replacement of the word Baal, which means Lord, but is also the name of a deity that was in competition, you might say, with Yahweh. So Baal is often replaced with Boshet or Bosheth, which means shame. So in 2 Samuel 4:4, you can see the Bosheth there at the end. But in the Septuagint, it's preserved as his name was Mephi-Baal. And, of course, you see the end of the word on each of those, Bosheth replacing Baal to make it less offensive. There are theological changes that are made to the text. These were often made because God was mentioned in an inappropriate way, at least to the scribe. So in Genesis 2:2, "And God finished his work which he had done on the seventh day." The Septuagint has, "And God finished his works which he had done on the sixth day." If you know the text, God rests on the seventh day. So this was inappropriate to God's work. And so it looks like the text was amended to the sixth day to make it theologically correct. Finally, additions and glosses. So these are generally explanatory additions or notes that clarify the text. So in Genesis 7:6, you have Hamabul haya ma'im al haaretz, which means, "And the flood was water upon the earth." Well, Hamabul means the flood, and of course we know when we see that in English what that means, but Mabul was a term that may not have been entirely understood. So this addition, haya ma'im al haaretz, was water upon the earth, may have been an addition or a gloss that explained what the Mabul was. In Luke 24:53, the verse ends with Amen or Amen in several manuscripts. And this appears to have been added thinking that this addition was appropriate for the end of the book. And so this was added to the text to make it correct in their eyes. So that's it. As a final thought, Wegner points out, and we wanted to emphasize, that intentional changes are much more difficult to ascertain because unintentional errors tend to follow a particular pattern. So if you think back to something like haplography, where the eye skips over something and deletes the portion of the text, you can sort of predict that in a sense. You can look back and see, oh, I see how they did that. It's more difficult to do that with intentional changes because they may be less obvious, and you might be able to argue, well, how do you know that's just not how it was originally? And that's true. So it's more difficult to determine if something is intentional. However, as you go through as a text critic, you need to be open at least to the possibility that a change is intentional, and that intentional change can be understood in a way that explains how a particular reading came to stand as it was. So, tomorrow, we're going to get into the transmission of the biblical texts, and this should help us understand the general history of how the texts were transmitted, both the Old and the New Testaments. So join us for that, and we'll start part 1 tomorrow.